She spent more than 2 decades calling herself his wife. She raised 4 children with him, stood beside him at album launches and awards shows, and told the world, again and again, that she was married to one of the most famous men on the planet. Then a British judge looked at the paperwork from a beach ceremony in Bali and said, essentially, none of that was ever legally real. That single fact, buried for almost a decade, turned Jerry Hall's divorce into one of the strangest legal stories in celebrity history. And it's a big part of why her split from Mick Jagger still gets talked about 25 years later. Here's what actually happened. Jerry Hall arrived in the public eye long before Mick Jagger ever entered her life. Born in Mesquite, Texas, one of 5 sisters, she left the United States as a teenager to chase modeling work in Europe, and within a few years she was one of the most sought-after faces in Paris and Milan. By the mid-1970s she was engaged to Bryan Ferry, the frontman of Roxy Music, and her career was already the kind most young models only dream about. Then, in 1977, she met Mick Jagger. Jagger was not a stranger to headlines about his personal life. He had already been through a high-profile marriage to Bianca Jagger, which ended in 1978 after Bianca filed for divorce citing infidelity, and he had a long list of relationships and rumored relationships behind him even before that. When Jagger and Hall's relationship became public, it effectively ended her engagement to Ferry, and the tabloids treated the whole situation as a scandal in its own right. But Hall and Jagger stayed together anyway, and for the next several years they became one of the most photographed couples on the planet, the swaggering rock star and the statuesque Texan model, trailed by cameras wherever the Rolling Stones toured. By the early 1980s, Hall and Jagger were functioning as a family even without a marriage license. Their first child, Elizabeth, was born in 1984, followed by James in 1985. 2 more children, Georgia May in 1992 and Gabriel in 1997, would eventually complete their family of 6. For years, the couple lived a life that blended a fairly ordinary domestic routine with the chaos of a global touring rock band. School lessons squeezed into hotel rooms, birthdays celebrated in whatever country the tour happened to be passing through. And through all of it, rumors about Jagger's behavior on the road followed the couple constantly. Given his reputation, and given what had already happened in his marriage to Bianca, those rumors were rarely dismissed as pure invention by the press or the public. In November of 1990, after roughly a decade together and 2 children already born, Hall and Jagger traveled to Bali, Indonesia, for what both of them and the entire world believed was their wedding. It was an intimate Hindu ceremony on a tropical island, and photographs from the day show a couple who looked, by every outward measure, married. For the better part of the next decade, that's exactly how they presented themselves. Hall referred to Jagger as her husband in interviews and public appearances. Jagger rarely, if ever, corrected her. Their children were raised, in every practical and emotional sense, as the children of a married couple. There was just one problem. Legally, none of it held up. The ceremony performed in Bali did not satisfy the requirements to be recognized as a valid marriage under Indonesian law, and the couple never completed the paperwork that would have made it legally binding in the United Kingdom, where they primarily lived. For years, this fact simply sat there, unnoticed by almost everyone outside their immediate legal circle, while Hall and Jagger continued to live, travel, and present themselves publicly as husband and wife. That quiet legal gap didn't matter, until it suddenly mattered enormously. In 1999, the relationship collapsed for a reason that left no room for ambiguity. Brazilian model Luciana Morid announced she was pregnant with Jagger's child. This wasn't a whispered rumor that could be denied or waited out. It was a concrete, undeniable situation that produced a son, Lucas, born later that year. Jagger eventually acknowledged paternity. For Hall, after years of tabloid speculation about her partner's behavior on tour, this was different. It was public, it was proven, and it was permanent. She filed for divorce in January of 1999. That's when the unresolved status of the Bali ceremony became the central legal issue of the entire breakup. Because the marriage had never been properly registered, Hall and Jagger were not, in the strict legal sense, husband and wife, which meant Hall could not simply get a divorce. Instead, in a joint statement issued that July, the couple confirmed they had amicably and formally agreed to separate after more than 2 decades as a couple and to obtain an annulment. An annulment is legally different from a divorce. Rather than ending a marriage, it's a declaration that no valid marriage existed at all. For a woman who had spent 9 years introducing herself as someone's wife, in front of cameras, in magazine profiles, at her own children's school events, that distinction was not a small technicality. It meant the identity she had built around being Mick Jagger's wife had, in the eyes of British and Indonesian law, never technically existed. In August of 1999, a judge in London's High Court Family Division formally ruled on the matter. The court found that the Indonesian ceremony had never been registered and did not meet the legal requirements to constitute a valid marriage, either under Indonesian law or English law. The annulment was granted. Alongside it, the court ratified a confidential financial settlement the two sides had already reached the month before, reportedly somewhere in the range of $15 to $25 million for Hall, a substantial sum, but a small fraction of Jagger's overall fortune at the time. Both parties, through their lawyers, said they were relieved that the formal legal process had finally come to an end. Hall has spoken about that period since, and she's been fairly candid that the annulment stung in a way that a normal divorce might not have. In a later interview with The Guardian, she described how getting a divorce already feels like a kind of failure to most people. You feel like you've let your family down, like everyone hates admitting a marriage didn't work. Having that marriage then legally erased on top of the emotional weight of the breakup added an extra layer of humiliation that a standard split wouldn't have carried. She's also said in the same conversation that despite everything, divorce isn't the end of the world, and that staying in an unhealthy relationship for the sake of appearances is worse for children than an honest, if painful, separation. What makes Hall's account of this period genuinely interesting isn't just the scandal. It's the fact that she doesn't tell the story as a simple tale of victimhood. She's acknowledged, in various interviews over the years, that she went into the relationship with her eyes at least partly open. Jagger's reputation preceded him by the time they met in 1977, and Hall has suggested that part of what initially drew her to him was exactly the danger everyone around her was warning about. That kind of magnetism, she's implied, made it easy to rationalize away the early warning signs. A familiar story for anyone who has ever fallen for someone they knew on paper they probably shouldn't have. She simply believed, as many people do at the start of a relationship, that things would be different for her. For a long stretch, it looked like she might have been right. Friends who observed the couple during the 1980s often described them as devoted to their growing family, and Hall herself has said motherhood gave her a sense of purpose that helped her weather the harder parts of touring life and public scrutiny. But the pattern of rumors around Jagger never fully went away, and Hall has acknowledged that navigating those rumors in the public eye came with a particular kind of isolation. She couldn't quietly process a bad week with friends without the possibility of it turning up in a newspaper, and she couldn't fall apart in private the way an ordinary person could, because there was almost always a camera somewhere nearby. The Luciana Morid pregnancy, though, was something else entirely. It wasn't speculation. It wasn't a blind item in a gossip column. It was a birth certificate. And for Hall, after 2 decades of absorbing rumor after rumor in service of keeping her family together, this was the one that made staying impossible. Those close to her at the time described her as devastated, not only by the affair itself, but by the fact that, unlike everything before it, this was something that could never quietly be waited out or minimized. What happened after the split is, in a lot of ways, just as revealing as the breakup itself. Hall didn't retreat from public life. She kept working, took on stage and screen acting roles, including West End theater productions, and remained a visible figure in fashion long after her modeling career had technically peaked. In 2016, she married media mogul Rupert Murdoch, a completely different kind of high-profile partnership, built around business circles and boardrooms rather than concert tours. That marriage, Hall's first legally valid one, ended in divorce as well, with Hall filing in 2022 after 6 years together. As for Jagger, he moved on to a long relationship with fashion designer Ren Scott, which lasted from 2001 until Scott's death in 2014, and later began a relationship with ballet dancer Melanie Hamrick, with whom he had another son in 2016. Between his relationships with Bianca Jagger, Jerry Hall, Marsha Hunt, Luciana Morid, and Melanie Hamrick, Jagger has fathered 8 children with 5 different women. A fact that, on its own, tells you a lot about why infidelity rumors trailed him for most of his adult life. Perhaps the most surprising part of the story, though, is where things stand now. Despite the scandal, the annulment, and the very public nature of the breakup, Hall and Jagger have reportedly settled into an amicable co-parenting relationship over the past 2 decades. With 4 adult children and multiple grandchildren between them, the two have been photographed together at family milestones, and by most accounts have made a consistent effort to prioritize their children's relationship with both parents over any lingering resentment between themselves. It's a level of civility that a lot of exes with far less complicated histories never manage to reach. There's something worth sitting with in that. The version of this story that gets the most clicks is the scandal version. The affair, the secret loophole, the courtroom ruling that a 9-year marriage never technically existed. And all of that did happen. None of it is exaggerated. But Hall's own reflections on the relationship, in the interviews she's given over the years, tend to resist turning it into a simple story of a villain and a victim. She's talked about real love and real family alongside real betrayal, and she's given Jagger credit, by her own account, for staying present in their children's lives even after the romantic relationship fell apart completely. That combination, genuine hurt alongside genuine acknowledgement of the good years, is probably why this story has stayed in the public imagination for so long. It's not just a scandal. It's a 20-year relationship that produced 4 children, survived a decade of tabloid speculation, ended in one of the more unusual legal rulings in celebrity divorce history, and somehow still landed, decades later, in a place that looks a lot more like peace than bitterness. Jerry Hall's story with Mick Jagger isn't really about a wedding that wasn't legally valid, or even about the affair that finally ended things. It's about what happens when a very public relationship runs into a very private kind of heartbreak, and what it takes years, honesty, and eventually some distance to make sense of it afterward. Hall has been more willing than most people in her position to talk about that process openly, and that honesty is a big part of why, all these years later, people are still interested in hearing her side of it. If you found this breakdown interesting, let us know in the comments what part of the story surprised you the most. The annulment, the Morid scandal, or the fact that Hall and Jagger are on good terms today. And if you want more deep dives into the real stories behind famous celebrity relationships, stick around. There's plenty more where this came from.